Sunlight, sharp and pitiless, carved the dusty square of Dustcreek, Wyoming territory. On a splintered platform, Elara Vance stood, her worth measured in debts she couldn't pay and a womb the town declared barren. The auctioneer's gavel hovered, poised to seal her fate. Then, through the jeering crowd, came silence. A Comanche man, his gaze holding the weight of 6 motherless children, stepped forward. What he offered wasn't coin. It was a mystery that could shatter her world or save it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've got something extra special saved just for you. Air in Dustcreek tasted perpetually of dust and despair. It clung to the throat, a gritty reminder of the relentless Wyoming wind that scoured the high plains and funneled down the single, rutted street like an exhale curse. Wooden buildings, bleached bone white by the sun and warped by neglect, leaned against each other as if for weary support. The saloon, the dusty spur, emitted a low, constant thrum of discordant piano and raucous voices, a discordant heartbeat for the town. Beyond the ragged edge of settlement, the land stretched vast and unforgiving, sagebrush flats giving way to distant, purple haze mountains where the Comanche still held sway. It was a place where hope withered quickly, a sentiment Elara Vance understood with a depth carved by grief. Elara stood on a hastily erected platform near the town's lone water trough, its stagnant surface reflecting the harsh blue sky like a blinded eye. The platform creaked ominously beneath her worn boots. She kept her gaze fixed on a point just above the heads of the gathered crowd, focusing on the distant, indifferent mountains. Looking down meant seeing the faces, hard, weathered faces etched with judgment, curiosity, or outright malice. Men in rough-spun shirts and dusty hats, women in faded calico with pinched expressions, children peering with wide, uncomprehending eyes. They weren't bidding for land or cattle today. They were bidding for her. The auctioneer, Jebediah Croft, a man whose belly strained against his vest and whose smile never touched his small, calculating eyes, cleared his throat. His voice, amplified by the unnatural quiet that had fallen, rasped like sandpaper on wood. All right, folks, settle down. You know what's on offer here. Item, one Elara Vance, née Thorne, widowed, age 26 years. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elara flinched inwardly, but kept her posture rigid. Item, the word echoed in the hollow space grief had carved inside her. Now, circumstances ain't pretty, Croft continued, relishing the morbid attention. Deceased husband, Silas Vance, bless his soul, perished in a silver lode collapse last fall. Left behind debts. Substantial debts owed to the Silver Lode Company, represented here by Mr. Harlan Finch. He gestured toward the thin, impeccably dressed man standing slightly apart, his expression one of detached impatience. Finch gave a curt nod, his eyes cold chips of obsidian. Further, Croft boomed, leaning conspiratorially toward the crowd. Medical consultations confirmed the infertility of the subject. No prospect for heirs, gentlemen. A clean slate, you might say, but sturdy, good for labor, housekeeping, whatever suits. The heat radiating from the sun-baked planks seeped through Elara's thin soles, but it was nothing compared to the burning shame that crawled up her neck. Infertility, the word had become her brand, whispered first in sympathy after Silas's death, then spat in accusation when the debts mounted and the Silver Lode Company demanded recompense. Silas had gambled, borrowed heavily against her small homestead on the edge of town, dreaming of striking it rich. The mind collapse took him, their dreams, and left her shackled to his folly. Her pleas, that Silas had concealed the loans, that the homestead was hers by right from her family, fell on deaf ears in Judge Miller's dusty courtroom. Finch's lawyers were slick. The town's prejudice against a childless widow was deep, and the law, it seemed, favored ledgers over lives. Now, her home was forfeit, and she was reduced to this, a public spectacle, her value determined solely by her ability to work and her perceived lack of worth as a woman. A fly buzzed persistently near her ear. She resisted the urge to swat it, fearing any movement might betray the tremor in her hands, clenched tightly at her sides. Her fingers brushed the rough fabric of her only remaining dress, a faded blue calico mended countless times. She remembered Silas buying the fabric, his grin wide and hopeful, back when the future felt like a promise, not a prison. Now, that fabric felt like a shroud. She focused on the mountains again, imagining the cool air high up, the silence, anything but the present. Starting bid set at $100. Croft declared, slapping the podium, covering a portion of the outstanding debt to the Silver Low Company. Who'll open the bid in? Remember, she cooks decent, sew's a fine stitch. Strong back. Silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Elara felt dozens of eyes raking over her, assessing livestock. A man near the front, Gus Henderson, who ran the livery, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. $100 for a barren woman, Jeb? Reckon you're dreaming. $50. Croft echoed, a hint of strain entering his voice. Do I hear 60? Come on, folks. She ain't ornamental, but she's useful. 60. The voice came from the side. Elara risked a glance. Old man Peterson, who owned the boarding house. His roomy eyes held no kindness, only calculation. Cheap labor for scrubbing floors and changing linens. 65. Henderson countered, scowling. The bidding crawled, sluggish and humiliating. $70. 75. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird. Each bid felt like a stone added to the weight crushing her chest. To be sold to Gus Henderson, known for his foul temper and dirt-floored shack, or to old man Peterson, whose boarding house smelled of boiled cabbage and despair. Either fate was a slow suffocation. She thought of Silas's grave on the windswept hill overlooking the valley they'd loved. I'm sorry, she thought, the words a silent scream. I couldn't hold on to anything. Not you, not the land, not even myself. A familiar, cold numbness began to seep in, the defense against unbearable pain. Then, a ripple of disturbance moved through the crowd near the edge of the square. Heads turned, murmurs shifting from the auction to something else. Elara felt the change in the air, a sudden tension crackling like static before a storm. She followed the crowd's gaze. 5 horses, their coats gleaming like polished chestnut and obsidian in the harsh light, stood quietly at the periphery. They were magnificent creatures, deep-chested and strong-limbed, unlike the wiry cow ponies common in Dustcreek. But it was their riders who commanded stunned silence. A man sat tall on the lead horse, a powerful bay. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple tunic, his dark hair braided with leather and feathers that stirred faintly in the dry breeze. His face was a landscape of stern plains and watchful intelligence, eyes the color of dark flint scanning the scene before him with an unnerving stillness. He held himself with an innate authority that seemed to radiate calm amidst the sudden unease. Behind him, arranged on the other horses, were children, 5 children, their ages seeming to span from perhaps 5 or 6 up to early teens. 2 girls, 3 boys. Their expressions were a mixture of solemn curiosity and wary alertness, their young faces echoing the man's strong features. They sat their horses with surprising ease, small hands resting lightly on the reins. One of the younger boys, perhaps 7, clung slightly to the waist of an older girl who sat before him. Comanche. The word hissed through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Fear, sharp and primal, mingled with hostility. Men shifted uneasily, hands drifting towards holstered pistols. Women drew children closer. Dustcreek existed in a tense, unofficial truce with the bands that still roamed the surrounding territory, but encounters were rare and fraught. Their presence here, in the heart of the town square during this, was unheard of. Elara stared, her numbness momentarily pierced by sheer disbelief. The Comanche man's gaze swept over the platform, over Croft, over Finch, and finally settled on her. It wasn't the leering appraisal of the townsfolk, nor Finch's cold assessment. It was observing, measuring, deep, unreadable, holding a weight of experience that felt ancient against the raw newness of her own shame. His eyes lingered on her face, seeming to bypass the humiliation of the platform and see something beneath the surface. For a fleeting, dizzying second, their eyes locked. Elara felt a jolt, not of fear, but of something else entirely. A profound, unsettling connection that stripped away the layers of her despair. In those dark depths, she saw neither pity nor condemnation, but a reflection of a loss as vast as her own. Then his gaze moved on, sweeping the crowd once more, a silent challenge hanging in the air. Jeb Crawford covered first, puffing out his chest, though his voice lacked its previous bluster. "Now see here, this is a lawful auction. You got business here, mister?" He addressed the Comanche man directly, his hand resting nervously on the gavel. The man didn't react immediately. He murmured something low, a few syllables that sounded like flowing water over stone. The children remained perfectly still, their large eyes wide, absorbing everything. The older girl tightened her arm protectively around the little boy in front of her. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. The only sound was the stamp of a horse's hoof and the relentless buzz of the fly near Elara's ear. Finch stepped forward, his voice icy with authority. "This auction is conducted under territorial law. You and your party are disrupting proceedings. State your business or leave." The Comanche man finally moved. He nudged his horse forward a few deliberate steps, the animal's hooves muffled on a hard-packed earth. He stopped well short of the platform, but close enough for his presence to dominate the space between the auction block and the townsfolk. His eyes met Finch's, then Croft's, and finally returned to Elara. When he spoke, his voice was low, resonant, and carried effortlessly across the hushed square. He spoke in clear, accented English, each word deliberate. "I see a woman," he stated, his gaze unwavering on Elara, standing alone before many. He paused, letting the simple truth hang in the air. His gaze swept briefly over his own children, clustered silently behind him, a visual counterpoint to Elara's isolation. "I see a debt named." He gestured minimally towards Finch. "I offer trade." A collective gasp went up. Trade? For the widow? Confusion warred with outrage on the faces of the townsfolk. Croft sputtered. "Trade? What in blazes you talking about, man? This ain't a trapper's rendezvous. We deal in currency here." The Comanche man ignored him. He raised his hand, not in threat, but in a gesture toward the horses he and the children rode. 5 exceptional animals, their coats rippling with muscle, their eyes intelligent and alert. 5 horses, he said, his voice still calm, devoid of theatrics but resonating with undeniable value. For the debt, for the woman. Silence descended again, heavier this time. Stunned, Elara felt the platform tilt beneath her. Horses? For her? 5 horses like these were worth a small fortune, far more than the paltry some the bidding had reached. They could pull plows, carry riders, sire strong colts. They represented wealth, mobility, survival. And this man, this Comanche father with his watchful children, was offering them, not bidding coins, but offering a king's ransom in horseflesh. Why? What possible reason could he have? To own her? To work her like the others planned? The questions tumbled through her mind, chaotic and terrifying. The numbness shattered, replaced by a wave of dizzying confusion, and a terrifying spark of something that felt perilously like hope. His dark eyes held hers again, inscrutable, offering no answers, only the impossible proposal hanging in the dusty air between them. The gavel remained frozen in Croft's hand. Finch's cold eyes narrowed, calculating swiftly. The crowd held its breath. The fate of Elara Vance suddenly, irrevocably, thrown into the vast, uncertain expanse of the Wyoming sky. The stunned silence in Dustcreek square stretched thin as sun-bleached canvas. Elara felt suspended in it. The platform's rough were the only solid thing in a world tilting violently. The Comanche man's offer, 5 magnificent horses for her, hung in the dust-choked air, an impossible equation. Harlan Finch's calculating eyes darted from the horses to man, then back to Elara, as if reassessing her suddenly inflated worth. Greed warred with ingrained suspicion on his narrow face. Jeb Croft's gavel remained frozen midair, his mouth slightly agape. Finch broke the paralysis. He stepped forward, his voice regaining its icy precision, though it lacked its former absolute control. 5 horses accepted. The words were clipped, final. He didn't look at Elara. His gaze was fixed on the Comanche man. The debt is settled. The woman is yours. He gestured dismissively toward her, the gesture severing her last, tenuous tie to the life she'd known, however wretched it had become. The pronouncement landed like a physical blow, yet it carried a perverse liberation. She wasn't going to Gus Henderson's shack or Peterson's boarding house. But what lay ahead? Yours. The word echoed, cold and possessive, in a hollow space within her. The Comanche man merely nodded, a single, grave dip his chin acknowledging Finch. He murmured again to his children, a low ripple of sound. The older girl nudged her horse forward slightly, leading a sturdy-looking dun mare by a braided rawhide rope. She brought alongside the platform, her dark eyes meeting Elara's for a fleeting, unreadable moment before looking down at the mare's neck. The Comanche man, her owner, her savior, dismounted his bay with fluid ease. He approached the platform, not looking at the murmuring, hostile crowd, his focus entirely on the task. He stopped at the base, his eyes level with Elara's boots. He didn't speak. He simply held out a hand, palm up, not demanding, but offering assistance down. It was a gesture startling in its simple courtesy, so utterly alien to the crude grasping of the auction. Elara hesitated. The numbness was receding, replaced by a tremor that started deep in her bones. Escape, however terrifying its form, was here. She placed her cold, trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and startlingly steady. He guided her down the creaking steps with surprising gentleness, his touch vanishing the moment her feet touched the hard-packed earth. He gestured towards the dun mare held by the girl. "Ayanna will guide your horse," he said quietly, his voice resonant even at a low volume. His words weren't an explanation, merely an instruction. He gave no name for himself. Ayanna. The name settled in Elara's mind as she awkwardly approached the mare. The horse snorted softly, its dark eye rolling toward her, but stood patiently as Ayanna adjusted a single, padded saddle blanket. Elara had ridden before, on placid farm horses, but mounting felt like climbing a mountain in her exhaustion and confusion. She managed, her faded calico skirt bunching uncomfortably. The saddle was minimal, no horn, just smooth leather over the blanket, and felt strangely intimate. She gathered the single rein Ayanna handed her, its texture braided and unfamiliar. Without ceremony, the Comanche man remounted his bay. He glanced once at his children, a silent command passing between them. Then he nudged his horse forward, turning its head not toward the main street leading out of Dustcreek, but toward the gap between 2 dilapidated buildings that opened onto the vast, scrub-covered plain beyond. The children fell behind him, Ayanna taking position just ahead of Elara, the little boy still clinging to her waist, his eyes wide as they passed the staring, silent townsfolk. Elara felt their gazes like hot brands on her back. Disbelief, scorn, a prurient curiosity. She kept her eyes fixed on the broad, buckskin-clad back of the man riding ahead. He moved with an economy of motion, his posture relaxed yet alert, scanning the horizon as they left the claustrophobic ugliness of Dustcreek behind. The dun mare followed Ayanna's horse with placid obedience, requiring little guidance. Elara was grateful. Her hands were shaking too much to offer anything steady. The Wyoming plains opened before them, immense and indifferent. Sagebrush stretched in silver-green waves towards distant, hazy buttes. The wind, constant and clean out here, carried the scent of dry grass and sun-baked earth, scouring away the lingering stench of Dustcreek's despair. The sheer scale was overwhelming after the confines of the town and her grief. Sky met land in an endless, seamless line. Elara breathed deeply, the air sharp in her lungs. Relief warred violently with fear. She was free of the auction block, free of Finch's cold eyes, free of the town's judgment. Yet she was utterly adrift, bound to a stranger whose language, whose world, whose very reason for claiming her were terrifying mysteries. Was this merely a transfer of ownership? From one master to another, albeit one who offered a hand down instead of a leer? They rode in silence. The rhythmic plod of hooves on hard earth, the sigh of the wind to the sage, the occasional creak of leather, these were the only sounds. The children rode with a quiet competence that spoke of lives spent in the saddle. The younger ones occasionally whispered amongst themselves in their own language, melodic and fluid, their eyes darting back to Elara with expressions ranging from open curiosity, a little girl with serious eyes, to wary assessment, a boy who looked about 12, his jaw set in a line that mirrored his father's. The Comanche man rarely looked back, his gaze fixed on the path ahead, a path visible only to him, marked by subtle dips in the land or the occasional lone juniper tree. Hours passed. The sun began its long descent, painting the sky in washes of orange and deepening purple, casting long, distorted shadows across the plains. Elara's body ached from the unaccustomed riding and the tension coiling within her. Her mind raced in futile circles. Why? Why me? What does he want? The memory of his eyes on the platform, that unsettling depth, that reflection of loss, offered no clear answers, only deepened the enigma. He hadn't looked at her as property. But what then? A servant? A replacement? The thought sent a fresh wave of cold dread through her. She was barren, marked. What use was she to a man with 5 children who needed a mother? Just as the last light began to bleed from the sky, they descended a gentle slope toward a shallow, willow-lined creek. On the far side, nestled against a low rise that offered some shelter from the prevailing wind, stood a dwelling. It wasn't the log cabin Elara might have expected, nor a teepee. It was a low, sturdy structure built partially into the rise, its walls constructed of thick sod bricks over a timber frame, the roof a shallow pitch covered in more sod and grass. Smoke curled lazily from a central chimney pipe. Nearby stood a simple corral holding a few more horses, and a smaller, open-sided structure sheltered stacks of firewood and hides. It spoke of practicality, a quiet endurance rooted in the land. The Comanche man, Stone Bear, Elara suddenly thought, the name surfacing from some instinctive observation of his solid, silent presence, reined his horse by the creek. He dismounted and spoke softly to children. They slid down with practiced ease, the older ones immediately tending to horses, loosening cinches, leading them towards a corral. Stone Bear approached Elara's mare. He held up a hand, palm outwards. "Wait!" He helped her dismount, his touch again brief and impersonal. Her legs felt like water. He took the mare's rein from her nerveless fingers and handed it to Ayana, who led it away with the others. Then Stone Bear turned and walked towards the sod house. He paused at the heavy, hide-covered door, looking back at her, not with command, but an unspoken expectation. "Follow." Elara forced her trembling legs to move. The scent of wood smoke and cooked meat grew stronger, mingling with the damp earth smell of the creek. Inside, the single room was dim, illuminated by the flickering light of a fire burning low in a central stone hearth. The air was warm and carried the comforting scent of cured leather and dried herbs. The walls were lined with woven grass mats and colorful blankets depicting geometric patterns in deep reds, ochres, and blacks. Parfleche boxes, painted with intricate designs, were stacked neatly near one wall. Sleeping pallets, covered in soft-looking hides and blankets, were arranged around the edges of the room. It was austere, yet possessed a sense of order and quiet warmth utterly absent from Dustcreek. The children filed in behind Elara, their earlier quiet dissolving into the comfortable bustle of homecoming. They shed their outer layers, the older boy adding wood to fire, the younger girl fetching a pottery water jug. Their eyes, however, kept returning to the stranger standing awkwardly just inside the doorway. Stone Bear gestured towards a space near the hearth, partially screened by a beautifully woven blanket hung from the low ceiling rafters. It created a small, private alcove. "You sleep there," he stated simply. His gaze swept over his children, then back to her. "These are my children." He named them, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. Ayana, the eldest girl, tending the pot over the fire, glanced up. Tusunk, the wary 12-year-old boy, stacking firewood, didn't look up. Mapia, a girl of about 10 with bright, curious eyes. Wikapi, the younger boy, maybe 7, who had ridden with Ayana. And Camimila, the smallest, a girl perhaps 5 with huge, solemn eyes, who clung to Mapia's skirt. "I am Stone Bear." Stone Bear. The name fit. Solid, unyielding, elemental. Elara managed a small, stiff nod, her throat too tight for words. His children. 5 names. 5 pairs of eyes watching her with varying degrees of openness and reserve. The weight of their collective gaze was immense. Ayana brought a wooden cup filled with cool water to Elara. Her expression was polite, reserved. Elara took it with murmured thanks. The simple act of drinking a grounding ritual in the overwhelming strangeness. Camimila, the littlest, peeked out from behind Mapia, her tiny finger pointing. "PTE," she whispered loudly, her brow furrowed in confusion. Mapia shushed her gently, pulling her back. "Hush, Butterfly. She is—" Mapia trailed off, looking uncertainly at her father, then at Elara. "She is here," she finished simply. Stone Bear said nothing, busying himself with checking a parfleche box. Tusunk deliberately turned his back, focusing intently on arranging the firewood with unnecessary force. The awkwardness was palpable, thick as the smoke curling towards a smoke hole. Stone Bear straightened, holding a bundle of soft, undyed hide. He walked to the alcove and placed it inside. "For sleeping," he said. He then turned, his dark eyes finally meeting Elara's fully in the firelit dimness. His gaze held that same unnerving depth she'd seen on the platform, but here, in the intimacy of his home, it felt even more profound. "You care for children?" he asked, his voice low and steady. It wasn't demand. It wasn't even really a question about her abilities. It felt like a statement of need, an offering of purpose. The why she'd been burning to ask seemed to hover just beneath the surface of his words, yet remained frustratingly out of reach. He needed help with his children. That was clear. But the vastness of that need, the complexities of stepping into a motherless home, the chasm of culture and grief between them, it was terrifying. Before Elara could even begin to formulate response, a shadow darkened the doorway. An older Comanche man stood there, his face deeply lined, his hair streaked with silver. He wore a blanket draped over his shoulders and carried a long-stemmed pipe. His eyes, sharp and discerning, swept the room, lingering not on Stone Bear but on Elara. His gaze was not hostile, but deeply questioning, heavy with unspoken tradition and concern. He didn't enter. He simply stood, a silent, formidable presence in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the pale-skinned woman standing by the hearth in the home of Stone Bear. The comfortable bustle of the children stilled. Stone Bear turned slowly to face the elder. The fire crackled, the only sound in the sudden, heavy quiet. The question hanging in the air was no longer just Elara's. It belonged to the entire silent, watching community just beyond the circle of firelight. Camimila, sensing the shift, toddled forward and, with the fearless curiosity of the very young, reached out and touched the rough fabric of Elara's worn calico skirt. The heavy silence in the sod house deepened, thickened by the elder's presence in the doorway. Firelight flickered across his deeply lined face, catching the silver streaks in his braided hair and the sharp intelligence in his dark eyes. He didn't step inside, but his gaze, ancient and appraising, held Elara pinned like a moth to a flame. It swept over her worn calico dress, her pale skin, the exhaustion that surrounded her eyes, before finally settling on Stone Bear. The unspoken question hung heavier than smoke. What have you brought into our circle? Stone Bear met the elder's gaze, his own expression unreadable granite. He didn't move from his position near the parfleche boxes, but his stillness radiated a quiet authority. He offered no immediate explanation, no defense. The children remained frozen, even Camillola's small hand still resting tentatively on Elara's skirt. The only sound was a crackle of the fire and the distant sigh of the wind across the plains. Finally, the elder spoke. His voice was low, whether like old leather, but carrying effortlessly in the quiet room. He used a Comanche tongue. The words flowed like the nearby creek, melodic, complex, utterly impenetrable to Elara. Stone Bear listened, his posture unwavering. When the elder paused, Stone Bear responded, his voice equally low but resonant. The exchange was brief, measured. Elara caught the name Dustcreek, a word that felt like grit in her mouth. She heard Wasatchu, white person, and her own isolation intensified. The elder's gaze flickered back to her, his expression unchanged, yet the weight of his scrutiny lessened by a fraction. He gave a single, slow nod, more acknowledgement than approval. He raised a long-stemmed pipe he carried in a gesture that seemed to encompass the house, the children, the land beyond. Then, without another word, he turned and melted back into the twilight. The collective breath held within the sod house released. The children stirred, the comfortable bustle cautiously resuming, though their glances toward Elara were now tinged with a new awareness of her strangeness, her potential to disrupt. Camilla looked up at her, wide-eyed. "PTE," she whispered again, her brow furrowed. This time, Mapia answered softly, pulling her sister gently away. "No, little butterfly. She is Elara." Elara, her name, spoken in the girl's soft voice, felt like an anchor tossed onto a stormy shore. Small but real. Stone Bear turned back to the hearth, his face impassive, but Elara sensed a tension in his broad shoulders that hadn't been there before the elder's visit. He added another log to fire, the sparks flying upwards like tiny, fleeing stars. "Gray Owl speaks of the past," he stated, his voice directed more towards the flames than to her. "He remembers what was lost." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The loss hung in the air. His wife, their mother, a presence Elara could feel in the carefully kept home, in the children's eyes, in the elder's protective suspicion. Her bareness felt like a cruel joke in this place steeped in family. Sleep in the alcove was a restless sea of unfamiliar sounds and overwhelming thoughts. The rustle of hides, the soft breathing of the children, the cry of a distant coyote, all underscored her profound dislocation. Dawn seeped through the smoke hole, painting the room in pale gray light. Elara rose before the others, driven by a desperate need to prove she wasn't just a burden traded for horses. She slipped outside into the cool, sage-scented air. The world was vast and quiet, the creek a silver ribbon in the early light. Horses stirred in the corral. Seeing an empty water jug near the door, she seized the task. Her legs still ached from a ride, and the weight of the filled pottery jug pulling at her arms was a stark reminder of her weakened state after months of hardship. As she struggled back toward the house, she saw Stone Bear emerge, his gaze taking in her effort. He said nothing, but the slight inclination of his head felt like a small victory. Inside, the children were waking. Ayana efficiently stirred the embers of the fire, adding kindling. Tasunk ignored Elara completely, heading outside toward the horses. Mapia helped Camilla dress. Wikapi watched Elara place the water jug with open curiosity. Elara saw a small tear in the beautiful woven blanket, screening her alcove. Without asking, she found a bone needle and sinew thread among the sewing supplies near the parfleche boxes, items familiar in purpose, if not in material. Sitting near the hearth, she began to mend it, her fingers clumsy at first with the unfamiliar texture of the sinew, but gradually finding a rhythm. The repetitive motion soothed her frayed nerves. Camilla toddled over, drawn by the activity. She sat beside Elara, her small legs folded beneath her, watching the needle move in and out with rapt fascination. "Pretty," she murmured, touching the undyed hide edge of the blanket. Elara managed a small smile. "Yes, it is very pretty." She held out the needle. "See." Camilla touched it cautiously, then beamed. The simple connection, unburdened by suspicion or history, warmed a cold corner of Elara's heart. Mapia, watching from where she was folding sleeping robes, offered a tentative smile in return. Sunk, returning from the corral, saw the interaction and his young face hardened. He deliberately dropped a bundle of firewood with a loud clatter near the hearth, making Camilla jump before stomping back outside. The day unfolded in a rhythm both foreign and strangely grounding. Elara shadowed Ayana, learning the patterns of the household, grinding dried berries and pemmican into a paste of morning meal, scraping hides stretched on frames outside, a task that made her stomach lurch initially, but which Ayana performed with practiced skill. Gathering firewood from the stack under the lean-to, she felt Stone Bear's presence as a constant, quiet undercurrent. He spoke little, moving with efficient purpose, checking the horses, repairing a harness with deft fingers, disappearing onto the plains for a time and returning with a plump sage grouse. He watched her efforts with the children, particularly Camilla's growing fascination, his expression unreadable but without disapproval. Her thoughts spiral when idle. The guilt over Silas's debts, the suffocating shame of the auction block, felt like specters haunting this fragile piece. Could this be anything more than temporary shelter? Could she, marked by loss and barrenness, truly find purpose tending another woman's children in a world so alien? She watched Stone Bear instructing Sunk on the proper way to hold a small bough, his large hand guiding the boy's smaller one. There was a tenderness in the gesture, carefully contained but undeniable. She thought of his words. "You care for children?" It hadn't been about ownership. It felt like a lifeline thrown across a chasm of grief. The minor crisis came in the late afternoon. Ayana ran in from the corral, her usual composure fractured. "Father, the bay mare, her leg." Stone Bear was outside in an instant, Elara instinctively following. The magnificent bay mare he had ridden to Dustcreek stood favoring her near foreleg, her head hanging low. Stone Bear approached slowly, murmuring soothing sounds. He ran his hands down the mare's leg with expert gentleness, his fingers probing carefully, his brow furrowed, swelling. "Here." He pointed to a spot just above the hoof. "Thorn or stone bruise?" His voice was tight with concern. The bay was clearly a favorite, a vital part of their livelihood. "Hot water," Elara ventured hesitantly, recalling old remedies used on farm horses to draw out the swelling and rest. Stone Bear glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. He nodded curtly. "Hot water." "Yes." He turned to Ayana. "Bring the water. Boil it." He continued to examine the hoof, his touch infinitely patient with the mare. Elara rushed to help Ayana fill the large cooking pot from the water jug she'd filled that morning. Together, they hung it over the renewed fire inside. The shared urgency created a fragile bridge. As they waited for the water to heat, Elara ventured, My husband had a horse once." It stepped on a sharp stone. We soaked the hoof. The memory of Silas, bent over the animal with gentle concern, felt sharp and bittersweet. Ayana nodded, adding a stick to the fire. "Horses are life," she said simply, echoing her father's earlier sentiment about the trade. When the water was steaming, they carried the heavy pot outside. Stone Bear had the mare's hoof cradled in his hands. Elara carefully poured the hot water into a shallow basin Stone Bear had placed beneath the hoof. Steam rose in the cool air. Stone Bear held the hoof steady, immersing the swollen area. The mare flinched but settled as he murmured to her, his voice a low rumble. Elara watched him. The firelight from the open door caught the strong lines of his profile, the focused intensity in his eyes as he tended the animal. She saw the deep care, the connection to the creature that was far more than utility. It was a glimpse into the heart of the man, protective, responsible, deeply attuned to the life around him. He glanced up, meeting her gaze over the rising steam. There was no smile, but the rigid set of his jaw had softened slightly. A shared purpose, however small, hummed in the space between them. "Thank you," he said, the words quiet but sincere. Later, after the mare was settled in a separate corner of the corral with clean bedding, and the children were eating the roasted sage grouse, Stone Bear spoke unexpectedly. He was cleaning his knife by the fire. "The bay mare," he said, not looking up. "She was my wife's favorite." He paused, the knife stilling in his hand. Her name was Brightwater. She had a laugh like the creek after rain. The words were stark, simple, yet they carried the weight of an entire lost world. He didn't elaborate, didn't look at Elara. He simply resumed cleaning the knife, the firelight reflecting in the polished blade. The offering, small and heartbreaking, resonated more deeply than any explanation of why he'd brought her here. He missed laughter. He missed a mother for his children. Elara sat very still, the simple meal heavy in her stomach, the melancholic beauty of the moment. The shared understanding of loss was shattered by the sudden drumming of hooves approaching the homestead at a fast pace. It wasn't the gentle plod of their own horses. This was urgency. Stone Bear was on his feet instantly, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt. Tsunk scrambled up, eyes wide. Elara felt a cold dread seep into her veins. The children clustered near Ayana. A rider pulled up sharply outside, the horse blowing hard. Not Comanche, a young man Elara vaguely recognized from Dustcreek, one of Harlan Finch's clerks, his face flushed with exertion and something else triumph? Malice? He didn't dismount, shouting toward the open doorway where Stone Bear now stood, silhouetted against the firelight. "Bear!" The clerk yelled, using the crude English approximation of Stone Bear's name. "Finch sent me. He says there's a problem. Says that Vance woman, she weren't his to sell outright. Some legal fiddle about the homestead papers." He spat into the dust, his eyes darting past Stone Bear to find Elara inside. A cruel smirk twisted his lips. "Seems you might have traded 5 good horses for nothing but trouble, Bear. Finch wants his property back. Or compensation. Real compensation. Coin this time." The clerk's word hung in the cooling twilight air, sharp as a knife at Stone Bear's belt. Not his to sell. Trouble. Property back. Elara felt a fragile piece of the sod house shatter like thin ice beneath her feet. The warmth of fire at her back seemed suddenly distant, irrelevant. Dustcreek hadn't forgotten her. Harlan Finch hadn't relinquished his claim. The 5 magnificent horses hadn't been enough. He wanted blood or coin, or perhaps simply the satisfaction of reclaiming what he saw as his. Inside, the children were statues. Camilla buried her face in Mapia's skirt. Wikapi's lower lip trembled. Tsunk stood rigid, his young face a mask of defiance and fear aimed at the unwelcome rider. Ayana moved instinctively closer to her siblings, a silent bulwark. Stone Bear didn't move from the doorway. His silhouette against the firelight seemed to grow larger, denser. The stillness radiating from him wasn't indecision. It was a gathering storm contained within rock. He looked at the clerk, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering flames, giving nothing away. When he spoke, his voice was low, resonant, and carried the weight of the land itself. The trade was made, the debt named, paid in horses. She stays. The clerk shifted uneasily in his saddle. Stone Bear's calm was more unnerving than shouting. "Finch don't see it that way, Bear. Says the homestead papers complicate things. Legal-like. He wants the woman." Or, he paused, puffing out his chest with borrowed importance. $500. Coin. By week's end. Or if there'll be consequences. A cold dread, colder than the Wyoming night, settling around them, seeped into Elara's bones. $500? It was an impossible sum, a death sentence disguised as a demand. Consequences. The word conjured images of men with guns, of fire, of being dragged back to the auction block. or worse. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms. No, the thought was a silent scream. She wouldn't go back. Not to Finch, not to Dustcreek's scorn. She looked at the children's frightened faces, at the alcove that had become her fragile sanctuary. She wouldn't go. Stone Bear didn't flinch. He held the clerk's gaze for a long, tense moment. The only sounds were the nervous stamp of the clerk's horse and the crackle of the fire behind Stone Bear. "Tell Finch," Stone Bear said, each word deliberate, chipped from stone. "The trade stands. The horses were good. The dead is gone. She is here." He took a single deliberate step forward, just enough to make the clerk's horse sidestep nervously. "Go." It wasn't a threat, merely a command, but the authority in it was absolute. The clerk swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling. He jerked his horse's head around. "You'll regret this, Bear. Finch ain't one to be crossed." He dug his heels in, sending the horse skittering away into the gathering darkness, the drumming hooves fading rapidly into the vast silence of the plains. Stone Bear watched him disappear, then turned slowly. His gaze swept the room, lingering for a moment on each child, a silent reassurance, before finally settling on Elara. The firelight caught the plains of his face, revealing a deep weariness beneath the stoic resolve. He didn't speak of Finch, of the threat. He simply said, "Eat." But the fragile sense of sanctuary was broken. The threat lingered like smoke. Gray Owl arrived again the next evening, not alone this time. Several other Comanche figures materialized from the twilight, men and women, their faces serious in the firelight spilling from the sod house door. Stone Bear met them outside. Elara, helping Ayanna scrape a hide stretched taut on a frame, felt their eyes upon her, heavy with unspoken questions and the weight of Gray Owl's concern. She kept her head down, focusing fiercely on the rhythmic scrape of the tool, the smell of the raw hide filling her nostrils, grounding her against the rising tide of anxiety. A low murmur of conversation began outside, rising and falling like the wind. She caught Stone Bear's voice, deep and steady, Gray Owl's measured tones, and the sharper cadence of a woman's voice. Elara risked a glance. A woman stood near Gray Owl, perhaps a few years younger than Stone Bear, her dark eyes fixed intently on the sod house door, on Elara. Her expression wasn't hostile like the clerk's, but held a fierce protectiveness. A deep-seated skepticism etched around her mouth. She wore a beautifully beaded tunic, and her posture spoke of confidence. Dawnstar, Elara thought instinctively, remembering Gray Owl's name. Someone who mattered, someone who knew bright water. Inside, the children sensed attention. Tusunk scowled, kicking at a loose piece of sod near the hearth. Camilla clung to Mapia. Wikapi, usually energetic, sat unusually quiet, twisting a piece of braided cord in his small hands. Later, after the visitors had melted back into the night and Stone Bear returned inside, the air remained thick. He said nothing about the council, but his silence spoke volumes. Elara busied herself, desperate to prove her place wasn't just a source of conflict. She saw Mapia struggling to thread a small bone needle with sinew to mend a tear in her brother's leggings. Elara knelt beside her. "May I?" she asked softly, holding out her hand. Mapia hesitated, then handed her the needle and sinew. Elara demonstrated the trick Silas's mother had taught her, moistening the end of the sinew slightly between her lips to stiffen it, making threading easier. Mapia watched, fascinated, then tried it herself, her face lighting up with success. "It works," she whispered, a genuine smile breaking through her worry. "It does." Elara smiled back, a fragile warmth blooming in her chest. She picked up another torn item, a small pouch decorated with blue and yellow beads, its stitching frayed. She began to mend it, her fingers finding comfort in the familiar motion. That night, a whimper cut through the quiet. Wikapi, tangled in his sleeping robes, was crying softly in his sleep. Elara, lying awake in her alcove, heard the rustle as Stone Bear started to rise. Driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand, Elara slipped from her alcove before he could reach the boy. She knelt beside Wikapi's pallet. He was murmuring about loud men and big horses. The clerk's visit had terrified him. "Shoo," Elara murmured, gently smoothing his sweat-dampened hair from his forehead, the way her own mother had done for her. "It's all right, Wikapi. It was just a noise, like the wind. You're safe here." She hummed a tuneless lullaby, a fragment of something half-remembered from childhood. Slowly, the boy's whimpers subsided. His breathing deepened, his small hand relaxing where it clutched the edge of his robe. Elara stayed kneeling until she was sure he slept peacefully. She looked up. Stone Bear stood near the hearth, watching her. The firelight was low, casting deep shadows, but she saw something shift in his eyes. Not approval, exactly, but a profound acknowledgement. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Ayana, watching from her own pallet, offered a small, tentative smile. Even Sunk, pretending to be asleep, had stopped his restless fidgeting. Only Camimila slept on, undisturbed. 2 days later, the threat materialized. Elara was gathering firewood near the creek with Mapia when she saw them. 3 riders cresting a low rise, kicking up dust. Not Comanche, Dustcreek men. One was a clerk. The other 2 were harder-faced, with rifles slung across their saddles. They reined in 100 yards from the sod house, while outside the corral, Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She dropped the wood, grabbing Mapia's hand, pulling the girl behind a thick clump of willows. Stone Bear emerged from the house, Sunk and Ayana close behind him. He carried no rifle, but his knife was prominent at his belt. He walked out to meet them, stopping halfway, a solitary figure radiating calm authority. The lead rider, a man with a thick beard and cold eyes, called out, "Bear! Finch sent us. You got our answer? The woman or the coin?" "The trade stands," Stone Bear replied, his voice carrying clearly on the still air. "The horses were good. The dead is gone. She stays." He repeated the words like an immutable law of the plains. The bearded man spat. "Finch says otherwise. Says the law is on his side. We ain't leaving without the woman or the money. Bear, don't make this hard." His hand rested casually near his rifle stock. Elara, peering through the willow branches, felt Mapia trembling beside her. She saw Sunk's hand clench into a fist at his side. Stone Bear didn't move. He seemed to consider the men, the distance, the sun high overhead. The tension stretched, brittle and dangerous. A hawk circled high above, its shadow fleeting over the standoff. "There is no law here but what is just," Stone Bear stated finally. His gaze swept over men, lingering on their rifles. "You bring guns to take a woman who is paid for? This is not justice. This is greed wearing a white man's hat." He paused, letting the insult hang. "Tell Finch the horses are his payment. They are fine horses, worth more than the debt named. He has his answer." He turned slightly, not retreating, but signaling the conversation was over. "Leave my land." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Stone Bear's calm defiance, the presence of his watching children, the sheer isolation, it unsettled them. The clerk looked nervous. The bearded man scowled, his hand tightening on his rifle. For a heart-stopping moment, Elara thought he might draw, but then he cursed under his breath, jerked his head. "This ain't over, Bear. Finch won't stand for it. You'll see." He wheeled his horse, the others following, kicking up dust as they retreated the way they came. Elara sagged against the willow, relief washing over her in a weak wave. Mapia squeezed her hand tightly. Stone Bear watched the riders disappear, his expression unreadable. He turned back toward the house, his eyes briefly meeting Elara's through the screen of leaves. There was no victory in his gaze, only the grim certainty of a storm merely delayed. That evening, as Elara was fetching water from the creek at dusk, a figure emerged from the tall sagebrush downstream. Dawn Star. She walked towards Elara, her movements graceful but purposeful, her face set in stern lines. She stopped a few feet away, her dark eyes scrutinizing Elara in the fading light. "You bring trouble," Dawnstar stated flatly, her English accented but clear. "Dustcreek snakes come because of you. They smell weakness. They smell something that does not belong." She gestured toward the sod house. "Stone Bear carries a heavy burden. His children carry grief. They do not need more snakes at their door." Her gaze was direct, challenging. "You care for children? Good. But caring is not enough when guns speak. Your place is not here. It brings danger. You should go before the storm breaks and you drown them all with you." She didn't wait for a response. Turning, she vanished back into the sagebrush as silently as she had appeared, leaving Elara alone by the murmuring creek, the water jug heavy in her hands, Dawnstar's warning echoing louder than the clerk's threats. You should go before you drown them all. The fragile hope she'd nurtured flickered, threatened by the cold wind of truth. Was her presence truly salvation, or was it the spark that would consume Stone Bear's world? Dawnstar's words flowed through Elara's veins like creek water turned to ice. You should go before you drown them all. The water jug's weight in her hands felt like the burden of her presence. Moonlight silvered the creek, the willows casting skeletal shadows. From the sod house, a thread of laughter, Camimola's bright and sudden, pierced the chill night. Elara closed her eyes. The sound was an anchor. Leaving meant returning to Dustcreek's auction block, to Finch's cold calculations, to a life measured in debts and disgrace. Staying meant fighting, not just for refuge, but for the fragile tendrils of belonging she'd nurtured in the firelit warmth of Stone Bear's home. The children's faces flickered in her mind. Mikapi's trusting sleep, Mapia's tentative smile, Camimola's small hand in hers. No, she wouldn't let Finch or fear steal this. She squared her shoulders, the worn calico dam from the creek's edge, and walked back toward the light. Dawnstar's warning hardening her resolve into quiet steel. The tension didn't dissipate. Gray Owl returned 2 nights later, not to the sod house, but summoning Stone Bear to a council fire near the cluster of dwellings visible on a distant rise. Stone Bear went without hesitation, his face unreadable granite in the firelight. He didn't invite Elara, but his gaze held hers for a weighted moment before he left. "Keep the fire," was all he said. The implication was clear. Guard the hearth, guard the children. Ayana took up a position near the door, her posture mirroring her father's watchfulness. Tasunk sharpened a stick with fierce, unnecessary strokes. Elara sat with Camimola on her lap, humming the tuneless lullaby, her heart pounding against the child's small back. The vast plains outside felt suddenly crowded with unseen eyes, with judgment, with the lingering threat of Dustcreek. Stone Bear returned as the first gray light of dawn stained the eastern sky. He looked weary, the lines around his eyes etched deeper. He stirred the embers of the fire, adding wood without speaking. The children watched him, the question hanging unasked. Finally, he looked at Elara. "They wish to hear you. Tonight." His voice was gravelly with fatigue. Gray Owl, Dawnstar, others. He didn't elaborate on the council's debate, but the gravity in his words spoke of deep divisions bridged only by his unwavering stance and the reluctant acknowledgement of his right as head of his household. "Speak your heart," he added, a quiet command that felt like trust. The day passed in a blur of nervous energy. Elara moved through chores, grinding corn, scraping the hide she left unfinished, mending Tasunk's leggings where he'd torn them again, her mind churning. What could she say to people whose world was a mystery to her? How could she explain the fierce, protective love blooming for children not born of her barren body? Mapia brought her a smooth, gray river stone. "For courage," the girl whispered, pressing it into Elara's palm. The simple gesture brought tears to Elara's eyes. Wikapi showed her a clumsy figure he'd carved from softwood, a horse, he declared proudly. Even Tasunk, while still avoiding her gaze, didn't flinch when she handed him the mended leggings. The small affirmations were threads weaving her into the fabric of their lives. As dusk painted the plains in shades of violet and gold, Stone Bear led the way towards the council fire. It burned bright in the center of a small clearing near the other dwellings, a ring of solemn faces illuminated by its glow. Gray Owl sat with calm authority, Dawn Star beside him, her expression stern, watchful. Other elders and warriors Elara didn't know observed her approach. The air hummed with the low murmur of the Comanche tongue and the crackle of the flames. Elara felt exposed, a pale moth drawn too close to the light. Stone Bear stopped at the edge of the circle, a silent, immovable presence at her back. Iana stood tall beside him, Tasunk just behind, his usual defiance replaced by a taut apprehension. Mapia held Camimila's hand, Wikapi clinging to his older sister's skirt. Gray Owl spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of the gathering. He addressed Stone Bear, but his eyes, sharp as obsidian chips, rested on Elara, the woman from Dustcreek, the one traded for horses. She stands in the circle of our concern. The white man snakes come to our lands because of her presence. She carries the mark of the Wasatch world, its laws, its greed. Can such a root take hold in our soil without poisoning the ground? Can she truly be a shelter for the children of bright water? He paused, the firelight dancing in his old eyes. We would hear her voice. Let her speak, if she has words for this council. A hush fell deeper than the prairie night. Dozens of eyes fixed on Elara. Fear threatened to lock her throat. She glanced down at the river stone, cool and solid in her hand. She thought of Camimila's laughter, of Wikapi's peaceful sleep, of the bay mare's trusting eye as Stone Bear tended her. She stepped forward, just one pace into the circle of firelight, feeling Stone Bear's steadying presence like a rock at her back. My name is Elara Vance, she began, her voice trembling but clear. She spoke English, knowing Gray Owl understood, trusting Stone Bear or Iana would convey her meaning if needed. I stand before you marked by the world I came from, marked by loss, marked by a town that valued me less than the debts of a dead man. She took a breath, the scent of sage and smoke filling her lungs. I cannot change the color of my skin or the tongue I speak. I cannot erase the greed of Harlan Finch. But I stand here because Stone Bear offered me something Dustcreek never did, a purpose beyond shame. She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping over the children, her voice gaining strength. I care for Iana's quiet strength. I care for Tasunk's fierce spirit. I care for Mapia's gentle hands, Wikapi's bright curiosity, Camimila's trusting heart. She looked back at Gray Owl, then at Dawn Star, meeting the woman's challenging gaze. I know I am not Brightwater. Her laughter is a memory I honor. Her place cannot be filled, but I can mend a tear. I can soothe a nightmare. I can grind the corn and tend the fire. I can stand between these children and the shadows that frighten them. Her voice dropped, thick with emotion. I asked for no place but the one Stone Bear offered, to help carry the burden of his grief, to be a shelter where his children can feel safe. My loyalty is here. My heart is here. With She fell silent, the stone clutched tight in her palm. The silence stretched, filled only by the fire's hiss. Then, Camimila broke free from Mapia's grasp. She toddled into the circle, straight to Elara, and wrapped her small arms around Elara's legs, burying her face in the worn calico skirt. Elara, she mumbled, the name a clear, trusting sound in the quiet. Iana stepped forward beside her father, her voice calm and strong. She speaks truth, Grandfather Gray Owl. She mended Wikapi's spirit when the bad dream came. She helped Father with the bay mare, Brightwater's mare. She carries no snake in her heart. Tasunk shifted, his jaw working. He looked at his father, at Gray Owl, then at Elara, her hand resting protectively on Camimila's head. She stayed, he said, the words rough but deliberate. When the loud men with guns came, she didn't run. She hid Mapia. It was the closest to acceptance he could muster, and it landed with the weight of a vow. Gray Owl studied Elara, his gaze lingering on Camilla clinging to her. He looked at Stone Bear, who gave a single, firm nod. Dawnstar's stern expression hadn't softened, but the fierce protectiveness in her eyes had shifted, replaced by a reluctant, grudging recognition. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards Gray Owl. The elder took a long breath, the scent of the pipe he now lit mingling with the wood smoke. "The children speak," he said, his voice carrying finality. "They are the heart of this matter. The woman Elara has shown care for Stone Bear's lodge. She has faced the council without fear. The trade was made in good faith, horses for a life. Stone Bear's right to choose a shelter for his hearth is his own." He looked directly at Elara. "You are welcome within the circle of Stone Bear's lodge. Tend the fire, tend the children, honor the memory of bright water. That is your place." Relief, warm and dizzying, washed over Elara. She bowed her head, unable to speak, Camilla's grip tightening around her legs. Stone Bear placed a hand, brief and solid, on her shoulder. The council murmured, the tension dissolving into quiet acceptance. The peace lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, as Elara helped Iana string pemmican to dry in the sun, T'Sunk came running from the rise overlooking the approach to the homestead. Riders, many riders, Dustcreek men. Stone Bear was already striding out, his rifle in hand, his face set. Elara's heart lurched. She gathered the younger children close, herding them toward the sod house, her eyes scanning the horizon. Not 3, but 8 riders approached, kicking up a dust cloud. At their head, astride a sleek black horse, rode Harlan Finch himself, his tailored suit incongruous against the dusty plains. They reined in just beyond the creek, a show of force. Finch's voice, cold and precise, cut across the distance. "Bear, you've had your time. I've come for what's mine. The woman, or $500. Now." His hand rested on the pistol at his hip. Stone Bear stood alone, midway between the house and the creek, a solitary sentinel. Before he could speak, Elara stepped out from the doorway. She walked past the corral, past the drying hides, stopping a few paces behind Stone Bear. She met Finch's cold gaze without flinching. "I am not yours, Mr. Finch," she stated, her voice carrying clearly. "The homestead was Thorn land, deeded to my father, then to me. Silas Vance had no right to mortgage it. His debt was his own, not mine, and certainly not secured by property that wasn't his to pledge." She held up a hand, forestalling his sneering retort. "The Silver Low Company's claim was false. You preyed on grief and the town's prejudice. The horses Stone Bear traded were worth triple the debt you named. The debt is gone. I am gone from your ledgers." Finch's face tightened with fury. "Lies! The papers were flawed," Elara interrupted, a lifetime of helplessness burning away in the fire of her newfound voice. "Judge Miller in Cheyenne knows the Thorn deeds. Ask him. Or do you fear the truth will cost you more than $500? She saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the calculation warring with rage. She pressed on, gesturing toward the sod house, where Gray Owl, Dawnstar, and several other Comanche warriors had emerged silently, forming a line behind Stone Bear and Elara. Their presence was a wall, silent and formidable. "You came for one woman. You found a people. The trade stands. The debt is settled. Leave. Now." Finch's hand twitched on his pistol. His eyes darted from Elara's defiant stance to Stone Bear's impassive strength, to the line of Comanche warriors, their expressions unreadable but their readiness palpable. He saw Iana standing tall in the doorway, T'Sunk beside her holding a hunting bow, his young face set in a scowl mirroring his father's. He saw the futility, the potential cost far exceeding one barren widow. With a sound of disgust, he spat into the dust. "This isn't over, Vance," he snarled, but the threat rang hollow. He jerked his horse's head around. "Move out." The Dustcreek men, visibly relieved, turned their horses and followed Finch's retreating figure back towards a barren expanse they came from. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the sage. Stone Bear turned slowly. His gaze swept over his children, safe in the doorway, then over the Comanche who had stood with him. Finally, his dark eyes rested on Elara. He didn't smile, but the fierce pride and profound gratitude in his look was more potent than any words. He gave a single, deep nod. "It is done." Weeks flowed into the rhythm of the plains. The bay mare healed. Elara learned to weave simple patterns under Ayana's patient guidance. Sunk grudgingly accepted her helper paring a bowstring. One evening, as Elara sat by the creek, watching the stars emerge like scattered seed pearls on indigo velvet, Camilla ran to her. The little girl carried something carefully in her hands, a small, beautifully beaded flower, blue and yellow, reminiscent of the one Elara had mended weeks before. "For you, Elara," Camilla declared, pressing it into her hand. "Dawn Star helped me." She leaned close, her whisper warm against Elara's ear. "She says you are sturdy, like good roots." Elara's throat tightened. She looked up and saw Dawn Star standing a little way off, watching. The woman gave a curt nod, then turned and walked back towards the community. Acceptance, hard won, but real. Later, Stone Bear came to stand beside her at the creek bank. He held out a folded bundle, soft, undyed deerskin. "For you," he said simply. Inside was a dress, simply cut, but exquisitely decorated with intricate beadwork along the yoke and cuffs, geometric patterns interspersed with tiny, stylized flowers. It was a gift beyond value, a testament to belonging. The women thought it fitting, he added, his voice low. Bright water would have welcomed sturdy roots beside her saplings. It was the closest he would come to speaking of love, a recognition of partnership forged in shared trials and the quiet tending of a family broken by loss. Elara ran her fingers over the cool beads, the smooth hide. She looked at the sod house, warm firelight spilling from the doorway, the silhouette of Ayana helping Camilla wash. She heard Tsunk's voice, arguing good-naturedly with Wikapi. She felt the solid presence of Stone Bear beside her, a quiet strength mirroring the enduring plains. The ghosts of Dustcreek, the shame, the debt, the barren label, faded like mist under the vast Wyoming sky. Here, by the Whispering Creek, under the endless starlight, tending the fire, mending the hurts, learning the rhythms of the land and the hearts entrusted to her, Elara Vance found her true worth. She was not a commodity. She was shelter. She was care. She was home. The creek murmured agreement, a gentle, constant song flowing toward the future no longer feared, but embraced.